Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we'll be discussing the article Silence and Solemnity in Craft Freemasonry by Sean Iyer.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, in alphabetical order by first name this time, we have David Colbeth, who's in King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington, Jarrod Dunham of Penticton Lodge 147 in Penticton, British Columbia, myself, Matthew Appel from Mill Creek 243 in Montlake Terrace, Washington, and Stephen Chung from Prince Charles Lodge number 153 up in Kelowna, British Columbia. And it was Jarrod's turn to choose an article this week, and he chose the article Silence and Solemnity in Craft Masonry by Sean Iyer, which was in the Ahiman magazine. I actually neglected to look up which issue. Does anyone know the issue number? Anyone? Hearing none. It was in that magazine. We'll have a link to it in the show notes so you can read it yourself. It's as with many things in Masonry, it's one of those things where I say, yeah, silence in Masonry. And then you read the article and you're like, dude, silence in Masonry. So since it's your fault that I had to go down this rabbit hole, Jarrod, did you have any introductory thoughts on the article or the topic?
Well, I mean, I was the same way. I was sort of like, oh, great, someone's written an article about staying quiet in lodge. And then you start reading it and you're like, oh, this is deep.
Exactly.
And they're supposed to stay quiet in lodge.
Yeah, it doesn't neglect that point.
No.
I was afraid it was going to read like a curmudgeonly old guys, why does everybody keep talking to lodge kind of thing. And it's not that. It touches on that, but it keeps going.
Well, it's the history of it. Like I'm gonna have to go back and read my ancient charges, like the fact that, way back in, Anderson's Constitution, it talks about no side talking in lodge and stuff. And so it's like, wow, like they were serious about, sit down, be quiet and listen.
And most importantly too, that it was some quality information being presented, right? The knowledge from the master or past masters. I thought it was interesting. It made a point of past masters were they also allowed to speak, and wardens, those pesky wardens.
Right. I really enjoyed this one, and the stressing of the fact that, that silence itself is not just the absence of noise. Like, it's not just, it's the fact that they use it in a way that, you're not sitting there just not making noise. You're sitting there contemplating the absence of noise in your lodge. I was reading in this, it was actually brought me up something interesting, that when I was master of Headley, we actually tried starting our meetings before we even started the meeting. Everyone would sit down and we would turn the lights down and have a couple minutes of just silent contemplation before we even started going through the ritual.
I was going to mention that I had visited a lodge. We would call it an esoteric type. Wasn't esoteric. I shouldn't. If those guys listen, it wasn't your lodge. But we have a couple of esoteric type lodges that are very formal, more traditional observant type. And they had a moment. It wasn't in the immediate opening. It was kind of after they opened, but before they began. And it was, yes, a couple of 2, 3, 5 minutes of silence. And while it was cool being a new visitor and not expecting that, I wasn't prepared, if you will, for that opportunity. And so they didn't give you a topic or something to consider, or they didn't say, consider your first degree, or consider our opening, or consider the charge, or consider something. And so I wasn't mentally prepared to be silent and to have that specific introspection. It was a weird thing, but now as I read this and think about, that would be cool to have in every lodge meeting, an opportunity. But again, I think it would be good to have something to think about during that time, or some kind of prompt.
Yeah, I agree. I experienced a similar thing going to Cuba, and they had done a moment of silence, and it was a couple of minutes, and though I knew it was just, it was to be silent. I had no preparation, like you said. I had no idea why they were doing it. At first, I thought they were doing it because somebody had passed, but there was no draping of the charter or any of that kind of thing. So it didn't make any sense to me until it got explained to me after the meeting, right? That's what happens when you go to a lodge in another language and don't know what's being said, right? But I still, my sidekick beside me could have prepped me, or I wish he had prepped me for that same thing, because then I would have known what to be thinking or doing instead of wondering why everybody's quiet for so long.
But I think the point of it is you're not supposed to be told what to think or do. It's quiet self-contemplation. So if you're sitting there,
that alone, quiet self-contemplation, that gives me an instruction, right? Which is, okay, I know what we're going to do.
So you felt it was more like, have they forgotten what they're supposed to do next type thing?
No, I knew.
Is that what was going through your mind?
I knew that they were having this moment of silence, because everybody bowed their heads kind of thing and everything went silent, right? So I just followed along, right? And I didn't know why, though. Nothing was explained. So I thought originally that they were doing it because somebody had passed, but then they didn't read an obituary or anything like that, right? So I was really unsure until it was explained to me after the meeting that was that moment of contemplation of life and things that it's like meditating, right? And it's like, okay, well, now that I get, right? But if they'd have told me what I was going to do ahead of time, that would help.
I think it was, for me too, was more that I was caught off guard. It wasn't something that I was, not that we can't have self-consideration, but it just was, I wasn't used to that, right? If you're not used to something and having that opportunity, it's just out of the ordinary. And yeah, again, it's not their fault necessarily. Did we all sit quietly? Yeah, we all sat quietly, and they're contemplated. I think in that moment I contemplated the prayer, because that's what had just happened. And so I thought about the prayer that had just happened. But again, it just was more that I was caught off guard. It wasn't the fact that I couldn't have that silence and opportunity, but it just was a out of the norm process, because our lodge didn't do that.
So from a practical standpoint, there's the silence in lodge. What do we feel that brings? Why? What's the point of that? Is there a point?
Do you mean like silence at the beginning for or
well,
just?
I was thinking just sort of in general in the non, I don't know, I was going to say esoteric, but that's not really what I mean. Non-symbolic sense, in the more practical sense. What does silence in lodge mean or do? I mean, we just discussed having a moment of silence before lodge to contemplate and center yourself. Is there more to it than that, or is that
well, as it's pointed out in the article, and that, as some charters were written, is that silence in the lodge, especially side chatter, is for me, that's the point. The first main point I felt from this was the fact that, that when you're sitting in lodge, you should be paying attention to the workings of lodge, not having a conversation with the person beside you. And so the silence in the lodge is so that we're there for the ritual. Otherwise, what's the point? So not paying attention to, like, even if you've gone through an opening and closing and 1,000 of the degrees, and you feel that you know them and everything, sitting there quietly listening to people recite the ritual and go through the ritual is, on one hand, you get it brings a different aspect to the ritual, But there's also the fact that by eliminating side chatter, it helps the people that are performing the ritual perform it better, because they're not trying to talk over you. They're not distracted by you. It's basically, just paying attention to what's actually going on in lodge.
Yeah, I find it very disrespectful when guys are chitter chattering on the side while other guys are trying to perform memory work, and because it's not the easiest thing to do for a lot of people, and it's very distracting and very, I don't know, like I said, disrespectful, I think.
I really liked the second to last paragraph, basically, where it talks about the ancient traveler, and that travelers in our sense are the initiates, are candidates, and they're inspired. I'm not going to get this right. I'm horrible with Greek and Latin pronunciations, but Aristeas, you can all ridicule me. It's okay. He was talking about as he went to the temple, and that he experienced what Masons must feel in similar respect to their work being done in the temples. And they're inspired by their wonder. When our officers know their roles and need no prompting, the work is much more powerful to see. Consistently doing so creates a space in which powerful and lasting impressions can be made, and in which the teachings of Freemasonry can be more clearly transmitted from each generation to the next. Silence, therefore, is not emptiness. A deep and abiding silence is not null or void. It is a container holding within both the impressive words of our ceremonies and the often difficult to express wisdom that we may slowly come to perceive through our practice of Freemasonry. So that really, it was a great ending. It's kind of like the charge in our work, in that it encapsulates the whole idea of the article, and that, yeah, while we are okay with a guy messing up a word here and there, because again, who else can you mess up in front of us but your brothers that love you and want to see you do well? But wow, when we do the work as good as we can in a respectful manner, it really adds to the whole ceremony. Yeah, so important.
So I guess, whereas the silence we were talking about just a minute ago is the silence before lodge, which some lodges do, where you're centering yourself and you're preparing yourself for lodge and doing some silent introspection. The silence of lodge is not the same on some level, right? I mean, the silence of lodge is attentive to something that's going on outside of yourself, right? It's not the same thing. There's my
maybe.
And it was interesting too, and I'm not trying to change the subject. I'm just trying to bring in the idea. It was interesting to me how the interconnectivity of silence and secrecy were connected, and that secrecy. And I'm trying to answer your point, Matt, that the idea of secrecy isn't that, again, not Masonry isn't a secret society, but we have secrets. And so the silence around those secrets is what it's really, the interconnectivity. And also, I highlighted almost the first sentence. It says, when Pythagoras was talking about, he said, either remain silent or say something better than the silence he disturbs. I thought, whoa, I'm going to try and use that as a punchline. If a guy that becomes a Mason should be silent until he has the opportunity to understand, maybe I should take that to heart, has the opportunity to understand, and then he can now speak and not be silent, but he still must maintain secrecy. And so the idea of understanding is also that you understand you must be secret, that there are secrets. And so again, it just is this depth of connectivity between silence and secrecy. So and a new Mason should probably remain silent until he has understanding. And it talks about that later in the article about the verte, vide aude tes, right? Am I saying that Latin?
Vide aude tace.
See, that's not how I did look it up. They said tace. Tace?
No.
Tace?
I think it's tace.
Okay.
But
and that seeing and audacity, or being daring, being silent, it just was interesting. Basically, be quiet until you know. But then once you know, be daring.
Mm-hmm.
That was powerful to me. So I don't know if I really answered your question, Matt, or not, but I think the idea of secrecy and quietness and contemplation in Masonry is important in that there's a time for it, but we should respect it.
Well, I think further to what Matt said, I actually think that the silence at the beginning of Lodge and your silence in Lodge are actually linked, because the contemplation of the first contemplation is, why are you here? You know, and then you've settled yourself so that you can remain quiet, or I shouldn't say remain quiet, but so that you can relax, realize what's going on around you, and not feel the need to what's the word I'm looking for? Not feel the need to even comment on what's going on or anything, so that you're settled, you're relaxed, and you can enjoy the solemnity of the ceremonies that are going to be performed that evening. It also so that you can not be the one that, when someone misses a word, you yell it out as soon as they miss it.
And that's what people say, well, why do we do the opening and closing? Well, that's exactly what it's for. I believe that's part of what it's for anyway, is to help you move from the outside to the inside and adjust your thinking and where you are in the mental space as well as physical space, that, hey, now you're no longer outside. You're now inside this lodge. You're in the sacred space, and prepare yourself to receive or to be attentive to.
Right. Well, our openings and closings are sanctifying the space that we're in until the lodge, because that's why things only happen in a tiled lodge, is that, until we've opened a lodge, it's just a room. Once we've opened a lodge, then it's become our temple and we can do things in there. So yeah, I mean, it sets up everything so that you can have the experience that you need to have within a lodge setting.
Interesting to find these words in here in Spalmsheen in Armstrong Lodge. They have these words in the carpet, embroidered in the carpet. That carpet was so important to them that they had it brought from the previous hall over to, they'd cut out the sections and brought them into the new lodge hall with them. But that's like their mottos all over the floor with those three words, the Vidiate and Tace. And so now I think this gives me a great piece to go and talk about at their lodge.
Right.
For the record, silence on podcasts is generally a bad thing.
Well, I was just thinking.
At some point, people are going to say, "What's wrong with my phone?"
Well, I found this article interesting because we live in such a noisy world. I mean, my family does not like a quiet house. Like my favorite time in the morning, I get up before everyone else, so I can read for half an hour in the silence before everyone else gets up and starts their day. And it's interesting. Like both Karen and the girls constantly have music going in their head, in their earbuds, and it's just, I find it interesting that in a world that is as noisy as ours is, that there is a place you can go where silence is something that is cherished and promoted.
And I have that same problem in my life. I mean, just trying to, I have in the past, and I've fallen off the wagon, so to speak, but just trying to set aside time for myself to sit down. I usually sit down on the floor in the corner over there and just have some silence of myself. And somehow it consistently doesn't happen. I feel great when I do it, and yet somehow it just doesn't happen. There's a lot of noise in the world. Yeah,
it's an opportunity to almost meditate, if you will. And I trying to think of which article or what. I listen to so many things and read so many things, but it was talking about that opportunity to be in a quiet, to not have music playing, just what you're talking about, Jarrod, not have music playing, not have something happening. We're in that world where we're bombarded by information and outstanding outside in stimuli, and just take the opportunity to do what you do, whether you're sitting and doing nothing, meditation, or whether you're mowing the lawn or taking a walk or driving the car, whatever you are, to take that, to be in quiet, your mind will automatically start working, and some of our minds go on overdrive. I have to have a piece of paper or something with me when I'm in quiet because I'm always thinking about something else. And I think that's what I do is I want to shut that off sometimes. And so I turn music on or I do something so that my mind doesn't go off in those directions sometimes because I don't want it to be silent. But when you're talking about being loud too, it reminded me of the second article was talking about how lodges, the somewhat of a myth about lodges that always met above taverns. The lodges were started above taverns, and that wasn't the case. And that's when you mentioned Anderson's. They was from a lodge in Scotland, was it? The Scottish lodges.
Well, his father was from a lodge in Scotland. They think that he was. Yeah. They can't prove that he was initiated in his father's lodge.
But that's where that came from, the idea of being quiet. It was really kind of cool to read the Old English or Old Scottish, I guess, language about being quiet. It basically said, shut up, sit down, be quiet, is what they said, and try to listen. But they weren't over taverns or weren't over bars and stuff. But also it went on to talk about how, I thought it was interesting how they said sometimes they had their libation before and sometimes after, many times after, but also they would, especially on the night of initiation, they would have some kind of festivity or social activity going on while the candidate was in their chamber of reflection, which I thought was kind of cool. And then when they're ready for the initiation, they would move from the table to another part of the room and draw on the floor, like we've always heard about, draw on the floor of the lodge room. They would initiate the guy over there in that part of the lodge room, over on the drawing, and then when it was all done, they'd erase it, then go back to their table in the same spots they were and continue with their drinking games, basically.
Well, it was funny because when I was reading that section of the article, it brought me back to a few weeks ago when we were talking about the warden's columns and why one is up and one is down. And I found something, I remember reading about the fact that when they're at a table, that it dictates whether they're at work or at labor or at rest. Which kind of ties into this whole, okay, well, guys, gotta go do a degree, put the, one goes up, one goes down, let's go, so it's interesting. I mean, this is a total digression, but it's interesting reading these articles and having what are totally unrelated articles suddenly become related in my mind. And this is, I get these moments. I mean, I get a smile on my face and I'm just like, this is why I do this.
Exactly.
This is why I'm in Freemasonry.
Yep. It is amazing how things interconnect like that. I'd love to go down the rabbit hole of the symbols, kind of some of the Greek symbols and all that. And maybe we could do that on the next segment.
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So on that note, it looks like that is going to be a longer discussion than we have time for. Let's phrase it that way. So on behalf of Stephen and Jarrod and myself and David, thank you all very much for tuning into our humble podcast. And as always, if you have thoughts on silence in lodge or other aspects of lodge conduct, other aspects of lodge conduct, please leave us a message and we'd be happy to read it and respond. And with that, thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.